$400 million. That's right, you heard correctly. Anthony Albanese has just signed off on what critics are calling the most expensive political cover-up in Australian history, and Pauline Hanson is absolutely livid. While ordinary Australians struggle with cost of living pressures, our Prime Minister has quietly handed over nearly $500 million to a tiny Pacific island in what opponents are labelling nothing short of a massive bribe to hide his government's catastrophic immigration failures. This isn't just another political scandal, this is a bombshell revelation that exposes the Albanese government's desperate attempt to sweep hundreds of dangerous foreign criminals under the rug using your taxpayer money. We're talking about convicted murderers, sexual predators, and violent offenders who should never have been in this position in the first place, and now Albanese thinks he can make the problem disappear by throwing money at Nauru like it's confetti at a wedding. Pauline Hanson has come out swinging, and she's not holding back. She's directly accused the Prime Minister of orchestrating what she calls a criminal bribe designed to hide the true scale of Labor's immigration disaster from the Australian public. When the woman who's never been afraid to speak truth to power says something this explosive, you better believe there's fire behind that smoke. But here's what will absolutely enrage you: this $400 million deal isn't just expensive, it's potentially illegal. Legal experts are questioning whether using taxpayer funds to essentially pay another country to hide Australia's criminal justice problems violates multiple laws and international agreements. We're not just talking about bad policy here, we're potentially looking at criminal misconduct at the highest levels of government. The story behind this scandal is even more shocking than the price tag. It all started when the High Court delivered the NZYQ decision, a ruling that basically told the Albanese government that their entire approach to immigration detention was unconstitutional. Instead of fixing the systemic problems that led to this legal nightmare, what did our brilliant Prime Minister do? He panicked and started throwing money around like a desperate gambler trying to buy his way out of debt. Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke, Albanese's right-hand man in this debacle, has been secretly negotiating with Nauru for months to create what critics are calling a criminal dumping ground. We're talking about hundreds of detainees, including individuals convicted of murder, rape, and other horrific crimes, being shipped off to a Pacific island nation that's smaller than most Australian suburbs. The sheer audacity of thinking this would solve anything shows just how out of touch this government has become. What makes this even more infuriating is the timing. The NZYQ High Court decision didn't come out of nowhere. Legal experts had been warning for years that Australia's indefinite detention policies were constitutionally problematic. A competent government would have been preparing for this ruling, developing proper policies, and creating sustainable solutions. Instead, Albanese's team was caught completely off guard and is now desperately trying to buy their way out of a crisis of their own making. The $400 million figure is mind-boggling when you break it down. That's roughly $800,000 per detainee being resettled, money that could have built hospitals, schools, or infrastructure for actual Australians. Instead, it's being used to essentially bribe a foreign nation to take responsibility for criminals that the Albanese government can't figure out how to handle properly. This is your money being used to cover up their incompetence. Pauline Hanson's accusations go far beyond simple policy disagreement. She's arguing that this deal represents a fundamental corruption of Australia's democratic processes, where a government can simply write massive checks to foreign nations to avoid dealing with difficult domestic problems. Her exact words were devastating: "This isn't governance, it's criminal negligence funded by taxpayer bribes." The constitutional implications of this arrangement are staggering. Australia is essentially paying another country to detain individuals that our own High Court says we cannot legally hold indefinitely. Legal scholars are asking fundamental questions about sovereignty, jurisdiction, and whether Australia can legally outsource its criminal justice responsibilities to a nation that lacks the infrastructure, expertise, or legal framework to handle dangerous offenders appropriately. But here's where it gets even more corrupt. Nauru's economy is completely dependent on Australian aid and support. This isn't a negotiation between equal partners, it's Australia leveraging economic dependency to force a tiny island nation to accept our most problematic cases. Critics argue this represents a form of neo-colonial exploitation where Australia uses its economic power to dump problems on vulnerable Pacific partners. The human rights implications are equally disturbing. We're talking about sending people to a country with limited healthcare, inadequate legal protections, and questionable detention facilities. International human rights organizations are already expressing concern about whether Nauru can provide appropriate standards of care and legal process for detainees, particularly those with complex medical or psychological needs. Tony Burke's role in orchestrating this deal has put him directly in the firing line. as Home Affairs Minister, is supposed to be protecting Australian interests, not finding expensive ways to export our problems. Sources within the department suggest that Burke was given a blank check to make the Nauru problem go away, regardless of cost or legal complications. This isn't responsible governance, it's crisis management with unlimited taxpayer funding. The opposition has seized on this scandal as evidence of Labor's fundamental incompetence in managing immigration policy. Shadow ministers are questioning how a government that claims to be fiscally responsible can justify spending $400 million on what amounts to an expensive band-aid for a problem that requires systematic reform. They're demanding full disclosure of all financial arrangements and threatening parliamentary inquiries into the decision-making process. What's particularly galling is how this deal was negotiated in secret, without proper parliamentary oversight or public consultation. Australians are finding out about this massive expenditure through media reports and political leaks, not through transparent government communication. This level of secrecy around such substantial public spending raises serious questions about democratic accountability and governmental transparency. The timing of these revelations, coming amid ongoing cost of living pressures and budget constraints, makes the political impact even more devastating. While families struggle to pay electricity bills and mortgage payments, the Albanese government is quietly writing nine-figure checks to foreign nations to solve problems of their own making. The optics couldn't be worse for a government already facing criticism over its handling of domestic economic challenges. Pauline Hanson's broader critique extends beyond this specific deal to question the entire framework of Australia's immigration and detention policies. She argues that decades of bipartisan failure to develop sustainable, constitutional approaches to immigration enforcement have created a system that's both expensive and ineffective. Her solution involves fundamental reform rather than expensive offshore arrangements. The legal challenges to this arrangement are already beginning. Constitutional lawyers are preparing cases that could challenge both the expenditure and the underlying legal framework that permits such arrangements. If successful, these challenges could not only invalidate the Nauru deal but potentially expose the government to massive financial liability for unauthorized expenditure. International reaction to Australia's approach has been increasingly critical. European Union officials have privately expressed concern about Australia's practice of using economic leverage to export immigration problems to developing nations. This criticism comes at a time when Australia is seeking closer international cooperation on various issues, making the reputational damage potentially far-reaching. The environmental and social impact on Nauru itself raises additional concerns. The tiny island nation, still recovering from decades of phosphate mining, now faces the prospect of becoming Australia's permanent detention facility for dangerous criminals. Local communities have expressed concern about the social and security implications of hosting hundreds of individuals convicted of serious crimes. What makes this scandal particularly explosive is the pattern it reveals about Labor's approach to difficult policy challenges. Rather than engaging in the hard work of policy reform and systematic improvement, the Albanese government's instinct appears to be throwing money at problems until they disappear from public view. This isn't leadership, it's expensive political cowardice. The financial sustainability of this arrangement is also questionable. The $400 million figure represents only the initial cost, with ongoing operational expenses, security requirements, and support services likely to require additional substantial investments. Taxpayers could be looking at billion-dollar commitments over the life of this arrangement, money that could address genuine Australian priorities instead of covering up governmental failures. Regional security experts are raising concerns about the precedent this sets for Pacific relationships. If Australia can effectively purchase policy compliance from economically dependent partners, what happens when other nations with deeper pockets decide to use similar approaches? The strategic implications for Australian influence in the Pacific could be significant if this becomes a model for international relationships. The domestic political fallout continues to intensify as more details emerge about the secret negotiations and financial commitments involved in the Nauru arrangement. Parliamentary committees are demanding access to briefing documents, financial projections, and correspondence related to the deal, setting up potential confrontations between the government and legislative oversight mechanisms. Pauline Hanson's accusation that this constitutes bribery isn't just political rhetoric, it reflects genuine legal questions about whether using taxpayer funds to secure policy outcomes from foreign nations violates Australian law. Anti-corruption agencies may need to examine whether proper processes were followed and whether the expenditure represents appropriate use of public money. The human cost of this policy failure extends beyond financial considerations to the real-world impact on communities, families, and individuals affected by Australia's dysfunctional immigration system. While politicians argue about costs and legal frameworks, real people continue to suffer the consequences of decades of policy failure and governmental incompetence. This $400 million scandal represents everything wrong with contemporary Australian politics: secret deals, massive expenditures without accountability, problems exported rather than solved, and a government more concerned with political survival than effective governance. Pauline Hanson's bribery accusations may be the tip of an iceberg that could sink the Albanese government's credibility permanently. The Australian people deserve better than expensive cover-ups and secretive deals that prioritize political convenience over genuine solutions. This Nauru arrangement isn't just bad policy, it's a betrayal of democratic principles and fiscal responsibility that demands immediate investigation and accountability. If you thought tonight's story was wild, trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. So don't stop now. Click on the video right here on your screen to continue the chaos, the drama, and the inside scoop only we deliver. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join the Australian News CC family where the real stories come to life. See you in the next one.